I just hate cold weather. Everything about it. The gray skies, the wind stinging my face, the endless shoveling. But my kids are just the opposite. For them, everything's an adventure. Snow's a chance to make snowmen. To give Frosty a carrot nose and a blueberry smile. To see how big a snowball they can roll. They're kids. The world is new. They remind me to see things with fresh eyes. So every once in a while, I can still fall down and make a snow angel. Every once in a while, I try to see the world through their eyes. But I still wish it was warmer.
Hey everybody, Nick here, and these are the Thypoch Simera-C M-mount cinema lenses. And if you just want the punchline, I think these are some of the most important lenses ever made. The only option like them on the market right now, and probably my first recommendation for most people looking to start shooting with cinema lenses. I bought this set directly from Thypoch myself. I paid for it with my own money. Everything here I'm saying is entirely my own opinion. These lenses are a little bit under $900 each, or you can get the set of 5 with the case for about $4,300. And there's a link in the description, which is an affiliate link so that Thypoch can track the traffic from those of you who choose to use it. Now, normally I avoid affiliate links or brand collaborations, not because I'm better or morally superior or that there's anything wrong with those things. I don't have a problem with them. It's just that I'm old and grumpy and pretty stingy with my time. So why is today any different? Why did I agree to put an affiliate link in my video for the first time? Well, today is different because of another first. In my opinion, the Simera-C lens set in M-mount specifically, is one of the most important pieces of cinema gear on the market right now. This set is absolutely the first of its kind with its particular combination of attributes. And I have been absolutely hounding Thypoch and its parent company, Film, since these lenses were first shown at IBC in Amsterdam back in September 2024. I've been begging them to get my hands on these lenses. They offered to send me a couple of E-mount lenses to borrow and review, but I said, I only want the M-mount set and I'll pay for them, but just please let me be among the first people to get my hands on them. And they said, sure, we'll let you pre-order a set sort of prior to the public launch, and you can get first dibs, but in exchange, we want you to post an affiliate link. That's our ask. That was their only ask. So I agreed to post the link, but again, I paid for these lenses as a customer, so Thypoch has nothing to do with this video. They haven't seen it. I don't have a list of bullet points I have to cover. I'm just really excited about these lenses. And if you see what I do in them and you decide you want to buy them, the link is in the description. First set of its kind. Anyway, let's get to these lenses. Why do I think they're so important? I've been searching for a long time for a set of lenses with a really particular set of attributes. Since I first got into cinematography, what I wanted was a compact cine lens kit that I could use on smaller rigs, but still had the optical qualities and mechanical attributes of some of the larger lenses that I like. And as of this recording, the Thypoch Simera-C in M-mount is the only set of lenses in existence that has all of the following 4 attributes. Number 1, true cinema lenses, meaning cine housing, cine functionality. That means standard gears in standard gear positions, long focus throw, consistent focus throw across focal lengths, and a reasonably wide range of available focal lengths. Number 2, fast, full frame coverage with good resolution and optical performance. For me, T1.5 or better in full frame is really what I want in a spherical lens, and I want to be able to record a reasonably sharp image with reasonable aberration control, even wide open. Number 3, a universal lens mount that can move across different cinema camera bodies or mirrorless camera systems. And number 4, and this is kind of the kicker that makes it tough, extremely lightweight, good for handheld or unsupported gimbal use, ideally around or under 500 grams per lens. And that's it. Those are the 4 things I've been looking for in a lens set for a long time. And the Thypoch Simera-C in M-mount is the first set ever made which ticks all of the boxes. And believe me, I've looked. There are a few close alternatives. So something like the Cooke SP3, which has a beautiful look. It has interchangeable mounts, including M-mount, but it isn't quite as fast as I like. It's also pretty expensive. There are the Zeiss Nano Primes. They're a similar story. They're fast. They have swappable mounts, not a universal mount, but you know, it's okay. They're also still pretty expensive and just a little heavier than I'd ideally like, coming up to like 1,000 grams. And you know, no way to use them on something like an ARRI camera. There are the Dual Lens Primes. They're great in every way except speed. Looking at the very high end, there are the Leitz M0.8 lenses, which tick all the boxes, except they still have pretty short focus throws because they're basically just stills lenses with gears on them. You could pony up for the Leitz Hugo set, which is again the same optics of the Leitz M0.8s, but in bigger LPL mount bodies, and then even more expensive, and then you've added some significant weight for the LPL, so you no longer benefit from the ultralight design. There are things like the Nisi Athenas, they come in PL mount, but they're 800 grams each and only T1.9, and then most cameras are going to require an adapter from your camera's mount to PL, so that's like another 200 grams, so now you're about double the total target weight. There are Rokinon DSX lenses. They're reasonably light, very different weights though across the focal lengths, inconsistent focus throw, really strong onion skinning on the 50mm, which I didn't like, and the build quality isn't great. I've owned a couple of them. There's stuff like Irix. Those are fast, they're universal, they're very pretty, but they're still about 1,000 grams a lens. There's SLR Magic, which actually makes some very fast cine lenses at about 700 grams each, but in E-mount only. SLR Magic does make a PL mount set, but it's slower and heavier. You could rehouse smaller stills lenses, and I've long considered going that route, but rehousing can be very costly, might not hit the target weight, and would probably take at least a year to accomplish. So nothing that really hits the bullseye. And when I saw the announcement of the Simera-Cs, I was excited, to say the least. These lenses are based on some very well-established optical designs. They're essentially homages or copies of the legendary Leitz Summilux rangefinder lenses. So I was really curious about what mounts they would be released in. Was it going to be specific mirrorless mounts, or would it be a swappable mount like the Cooke SP3 or what? At IBC, they showed them off in M-mount, which is fantastic because M-mount lenses can be adapted to almost any other mount. But when the lenses finally launched to the public, Thypoch went with E-mount. I pestered Thypoch relentlessly over email, like I was seriously annoying. But I got frustrated at their answers. At first, they told me Simera-C lenses would never be made in M-mount. Then I pointed out, you've made them in M-mount and you showed them off at IBC. And they said, well, those were just prototypes. No one's gonna get their hands on those. And I was like, you've already given them to several YouTubers. They have gotten their hands on the M-mount set. And like weeks and weeks of back and forth. And Thypoch was eventually like, yes, okay. We will release them in M-mount to the public, not until December. And so I just soldiered on. I just kept pestering them until they agreed to take my money and sell me an M-mount set. So they gave in, my pestering paid off, and now I finally have this set. Opening up the box for these, I almost had to check to make sure everything was in there because the setup is very, very light. Even the case is like a little lighter than I was expecting. It's really, instead of like the industrial plastic of like a Pelican case, this is kind of like die-pressed metal. It's like very thin aluminum, but it's still nice and robust. And the lenses, again, they're a similar story. They're just so light. If you're used to ordinary cinema lenses in the 1 to 2 kilogram range, these will surprise you. They're just the tiniest, lightest little things you can imagine, but they still inspire total confidence. The focus and iris mechanisms are great. They're nicely dampened, no grinding or noise. Each one has a focus throw of about 200 degrees, which is great for handheld or follow focus use. I got the whole set, which is the 21, 28, 35, 50, and 75. The case has custom cutouts in the foam. It's great. The front caps are just a plasticky thing. I ended up taking off most of them because I adapted all these with 62 to 67 millimeter step-up rings, and then I just leave them with the ring in the box like that. And of course, at the back of each lens, we've got that M-mount flange. So, what is M-mount? And why is M-mount so important? You might be a little confused thinking like, do any cameras actually use M-mount? Well, none that I own, right? But let's back up for a second and talk about the history here. M-mount is about 70 years old. It's almost like the original mirrorless mount, if you will. In the early days of portable stills and video cameras, you had two options. The fancier of the two was a reflex camera. That's what the R in SLR stands for. It's also the flex in the famous Ariflex line of film cameras. In a reflex camera, there's a mirror and prism inside the camera that allows you to see through the lens in your viewfinder, so you know exactly what your shot will look like. The actual composition, the field of view, the depth of field. When you release the shutter, the mirror would flip up, blacking out your view through the camera in order to allow the light to hit the film and expose it. Then the mirror would flip back down so you can continue to compose again. Film cameras like the Ariflex were a little different, using a rotating mechanism rather than a flipping one, but we're not going to get into that right now. So reflex cameras on the one hand. Then on the other hand, there were viewfinder cameras. You mounted the lens to the camera, but you weren't actually looking through it. You looked through a different optical system to compose your shot. Sometimes it wasn't even an optical system at all, just a little box with air in it. You're just kind of guessing. Rangefinder cameras are essentially viewfinder cameras, but like with their own complex little optical system for the viewfinder that can maybe like triangulate the exact composition you're going to try and use, that kind of thing. But the point is that viewfinder and rangefinder cameras, they don't need the mirror and prism set up inside the camera body, so the whole camera body can be smaller and the lens flange gets closer to the film or sensor or whatever you have there. M-mount was a standard developed by Leica in the 1950s for their small rangefinder cameras. In fact, the M in M-mount stands for Mesucha, I think, the German word for rangefinder. It's probably the longest lived rangefinder mount, and there are still lenses made for it today when its competitors like Canon 7 and Leica's own M39 are long gone. Rangefinder equipment receded from the market starting in about 1970 as SLR cameras and then digital SLR cameras started to dominate the market. But as digital mirrorless cameras really took hold in the 2010s and are now essentially ubiquitous, older rangefinder lenses are getting a second life, and M-mount is again relevant to a larger customer base. What's crucial here is that digital mirrorless mounts are even shorter than those old rangefinder mounts. All of them are. That means that any M-mount lens can be adapted onto just about any digital mirrorless system because there's enough space between the back of the M-mount lens and the front of the mirrorless camera for an adapter. If that's confusing, the bottom line is you can use M-mount lenses on just about every modern camera. Canon RF mount cameras, Sony E-mount cameras, Nikon Z-mount cameras, L-mount, X-mount, they can all be adapted to M-mount. Just pick the appropriate adapter for your camera and you can use an M-mount lens just about anywhere. Even ARRI Alexa cameras can be rigged to work with M-mount, although with everything ARRI, the mounts are a bit pricier. My point is that if the goal is to create an ultra-light cinema lens, there couldn't be a more perfect standard available. I can take this Simera-C lens and just as easily put it on this V-Raptor X as I can chuck it on the small Sony A9 III recording me right now. For those of you who have been saying like, oh, I wish they'd release Simera-C in PL mount, you're missing the point. In order to design a lens that can be both this light and this fast, you need a really short flange mount. And M-mount's the best possible option because it can be adapted to almost every modern camera. There are still modern manufacturing processes for the flange, etc. I can see an argument for saying it'd be nice to have these in EF mount, but at that point you're really running out of room for the iris ring, and I think M-mount is just the perfect standard for ultralight lenses. My suggestion to Thypoch when I was pestering them over email was forget about promoting the E-mount set or any other mirrorless mount for that matter, but just really highlight what M-mount is. Maybe even sell the kit with a bunch of adapters in it and be like, hey, this is the universal lightweight set. But they didn't want to do that. They wanted to focus on E-mount for all the FX3 shooters out there. But then it turned out all the working cinematographers told them the same thing I did, which is like, hey, we'd really like M-mount. And so they finally relented. And now we finally have the set we should have had in the first place. Don't skimp on adapters. So M-mount is great for the reasons I just described, but one area that can be annoying is the adapter itself. I tried out a number of different options, most of which had significant play, either between the lens and the adapter or the adapter and the camera, or both. The V-Raptor has a locking RF mount, so it eliminates play there pretty well, but you still could end up with play between the lens and the adapter. So far, the best ones I've used are from TT Artisan. Both the RF and E-mount versions work well. I'm also looking at some locking adapter options. There's a company called XP Image that makes some at a reasonable price, and I've ordered a couple. Another company called C7 Adapters makes some nice looking locking adapters, but they don't make an E-mount version, just RF, and that one's much pricier at about $600. So for now, I'm using the TT Artisan adapters. I'm gonna get the XP Image ones, and I can show you that if you're interested, and I'll leave links in the description. Why these lenses? Okay, so that's why I like M-mount for this set, but why these lenses in particular? After all, filmmakers are lucky in that there are a lot of great cinema lenses out there right now. My main set of lenses comes from Thypoch's parent company, DZO Film, the ARL primes. These are absolutely fantastic, and I love them more every time I use them. They're not getting replaced, but they're big, and that can come with its costs in terms of convenience. Simera-C is the first set of cinema-oriented primes that gives me the look I want in a small package that can go anywhere. These lenses just open up new opportunities and ideas which were either impractical or impossible with larger setups. There are times I want to bring the V-Raptor and the RL primes to a shoot, but it's a faster paced setting or somewhere where traveling light is really important, and lugging all of that gear around might be too much to ask. So I've been looking for a really good set of fast mini primes, and the announcement of these finally ticked every box. So, I paid for them sight unseen with the hope and the belief that they'd do what I wanted, but I wasn't completely in the dark about what they'd look like. Thypoch's Simera lenses, prior to being sold as the Simera-C cinema housing version, they were originally designed as stills lenses, specifically to compete with the storied and beloved Leica rangefinder lenses, also sold as the Leitz M0.8 and Leitz Hugo cinema sets. All three of those sets, the rangefinders, the M0.8s, and the Hugos, they all have the same optics, just different housings and mechanisms. And if the brand names are confusing, Leica and Leitz are essentially the same company. And although I don't have that Leitz glass here for direct comparison, others across the internet have done heads-up comparisons of Leica against Simera and found the Simera optics to compete very favorably with the higher-priced Leitz glass. Definitely check out the reviews on philipreeve.net and fredmiranda.com if you're curious. Again, links in the description. For me, the bottom line was that these weren't complete unknowns. They're fairly well-developed optical designs, and I was happy to take the leap. And one more word about the Leica-inspired design. It's become really popular in some corners of the internet to say that copying a vintage lens is somehow bad. You hear phrases like cheap Chinese copy and the like, and as usual, I have a different take. The optical formulas for all of these lenses were patented many decades ago, and those patents have all expired decades ago. Not only is it okay to copy expired patent designs, but that's exactly why patent law exists in the first place. Patents incentivize the creator of the invention with a limited monopoly to sell the invention, and once the patent has lapsed, the idea is that the public will benefit from lower cost copies of the invention. Think generic medicines and the like. The availability of these legendary optics in a more affordable package is patent law operating properly. I'm delighted that we can have Summilux type lens designs, not only at a lower cost, but in a compact housing for modern cinema cameras and modern workflows. In my opinion, Thypoch is delivering on a market need that everyone else has so far ignored. How do they look? So, I ordered my set, and they finally arrived. How do these lenses look? In a word, they're lovely. They have plenty of resolution, plenty of speed, no major or obvious flaws, having the benefit of a whole lot of historical lens design to draw upon. Being stills glass, there is significantly more focus breathing than you'll see in cinema-specific designs, and maybe they don't have quite the clinical corner-to-corner sharpness of something like a Sigma or a Zeiss. Ultimately, I was just looking for good, fast lenses that would get the job done without adding a lot of weight to the equation, and that's exactly what the Simera-C is. They combine good technical performance with just the right amount of unique charm. The immediate question most of you will ask is how they compare to the RL primes. The short answer is you get 75% of the performance for 25% of the weight. So if I'm holding the camera, it can be really nice to have the lower weight of the Simeras, but if I can put the camera on sticks or a jib or just hand the camera to someone else, I'll probably pick the RLs more often than not. The RLs are like my holy grail. They just deliver the perfect image every time I look through them. And they make a shooting day go a little more smoothly, given that they're all the exact same size and length, so swinging a lens takes 10 seconds, but they are heavy. The Simeras are close in terms of speed, resolution, and subtle character, but at only a fraction of the weight. You do have to deal with the focus breathing, more vignetting compared to RLs, but beyond that, it's a pretty similar look. Thypoch even used coatings for the Simeras with a similar blue to what they use on the RL coatings. That blue can show up in lens flares, and I really dig it. It's most noticeable in the 35mm focal length, a little bit less in the 21mm, and then even less in all the other focal lengths, but I just love this tiny size. It's an invitation to experiment. When you don't have to throw your back out to reposition a camera, you're more likely to do so. I think these lenses will be great for things like car mounts, helmet cams, body-mounted shots, all that kind of stuff. The Simeras are full-frame lenses built for a 43mm image circle nominally. They do cover the V-Raptor's slightly larger VistaVision sensor, but whether you're on regular, full-frame, or VistaVision, they are going to vignette more than something cleaner or more modern like the RL Primes or the Nisi Athenas. Especially wide open, there's a decent amount of illumination fall-off towards the corners. and more so on the wider focal length lenses, less so on the longer ones. And even stop down, they still vignette quite a bit. Something like the Arl primes, again, like true top tier cinema glass, by the time you hit T4 on the Arls, illumination is like perfectly even. Not true on the Simeras, there will still be some fall off, but a little vignetting is a total non-issue for me. As long as your camera has decent dynamic range, you can just lift the exposure of the corners without issue. I have a video about how to do that in Resolve. If you're interested, I'll put a link in the description. And I'll happily fix vignetting manually in exchange for the absurdly lightweight. The focus breathing is probably the more annoying characteristic. I do think people complain way too much about focus breathing, but every once in a while it can be annoying. Looking at sharpness, these lenses are solid, nothing to complain about whatsoever, totally usable wide open. And I want to be really clear about this. There's this growing sentiment that camera reviews on YouTube are largely aimed at YouTube-style creators, meaning if someone on YouTube says product X is great, they mean it's great for small screen delivery, but your footage is going to fall apart in a theater. And I don't have any problem with products aimed at YouTubers. I think YouTube is a perfectly legitimate production format. But personally, I do care about work that will stand up to scrutiny when viewed on large screens. So when I say something has enough resolution for me, I mean it has enough resolution for the largest delivery formats out there. These are great lenses, no matter what you're doing. And that's not a huge surprise, right? As I mentioned above, these are pretty mature lens designs, good resolution, decent aberration control, no huge or obvious flaws. But that being said, they still do show some signs of their vintage origins. You'll get a little bit more chromatic aberration than more modern designs. Perhaps a touch more veiling glare. Nothing to make me worried. Perhaps if you're shooting a lot of dark tree canopies against a bright noontime sky, you'll see a little bit more color fringing. And in that case, maybe you want to pick a Sigma lens instead. But if what you care about is largely narrative work, people, locations, products, music videos, documentaries, journalism, these will all do the job and then some. The bokeh is beautiful, smooth, it's not busy or distracting, there's not much onion skinning, which is good. There's maybe a tiny bit of onion skinning on the 35mm, but again, as far as compromises go, I'll take it. Most of the focal lengths exhibit a harder outer edge on the bokeh. It's a characteristic of overcorrection, which I actually like a lot. It's present in the Arl primes as well, and generally the Simeras cut really nicely with the Arls. Bokeh shape is nice as well. There's a very gentle swirl in the frame. You'll see it more in full frame and less if you're shooting Super 35. I've previously described that as almost hugging the center of frame. I think some other YouTubers absconded with that same description, so whether or not I inspired them, you may hear those words in other channels. Bokeh stays circular as you stop down thanks to a whopping 16 iris blades, something I've never seen in lenses this small. And the Simeras flare quite beautifully. You get a lot of really nice stuff here, especially in the 35mm lens, and all of it tends to skew slightly blue, which I like. You do need a pretty strong and direct source to get the flare. It isn't going to just show up everywhere. And when it does, it's usually not so much of a distraction. But if you decide to lean into it, you can get some fun stuff. Now, I don't really like to talk about lenses in terms of clinical versus vintage because those words aren't really well defined. They can mean different things to different people. But I just tell you what I see, what I like, and you can judge for yourself based on the footage. But if you like to think in those kinds of words, I'd say these have a fairly clean look, but definitely with some charm. I'd say the Arl primes are cleaner than the Simeras, and yet the Arls manage to be even more charming in my opinion, if that makes any sense. Sorry if that sounds non-committal. Again, I don't really use these words, but I love how the Simeras look. I just think the Arls are a little bit more my favorite, but at a much higher weight, size, and cost. The Simeras are a pretty close second. You know, like I found the Nisi Athena lenses to be very nice, but they didn't give me that same feeling of charm. I felt like they were a bit cold, a bit harsh. The Simera-C lenses just give me a nicer feeling, kind of how I feel like with the Arl lenses. If that doesn't make any sense, I apologize. Just watch the footage and judge for yourself. Zooming out. Now, looking at the set as a whole, the focal lengths included here are 21, 28, 35, 50, and 75. You might say the 28 is kind of the odd man out. It's not only pretty close to the 35, but it's not as wide as your usual 24, 25. But together as a set of 5, they really do form a solid core set of lenses. You might complain there's no super wide or no super tele, at least not right now, but that would miss the whole point here. This isn't meant to be the everything set. It's meant to be your compact kit that does almost everything you need in a tiny package. I'd love to see the set get fleshed out with a couple more options, but for now the ones they picked are pretty much perfect, especially now that the 21 has been launched. Build quality is outstanding. Everything is well made. The rings are nicely dampened. They feel fantastic. There's no play or wobble anywhere. The 16 iris blades is a really nice addition that I wasn't expecting. You know, if there's one thing that bugs me, it's that I wish all 5 had the same length, barrel diameter, and filter threading. They don't. So I just put 62 to 67 millimeter step-up rings on everything except the 75. So it just brings everything up to 67, which matches like some of my Sony lenses. I have a couple of screw-on filters that are 67s, and then you can go from 67 to a matte box ring. Tilta makes them. So sometimes I use that ring and then the Tilta Mirage, especially if I want to use the DJI Focus Pro, because I just chucked the LiDAR on the end of the matte box. And so far, that's been sort of where I landed in terms of using Focus Pro or screw-on filters or the drop-down filters in the Tilta Mirage. I'm not sure if that's where I'll stay or if I'm going to change something at some point, but for now it's usable and it's still crazy light. But taking a step back for a moment, why go through this at all? If we're aiming for compact but still relatively clean and modern, and we like autofocus, why not just grab some of the good modern autofocus lenses like the Sony G Master Primes? Well, part of the answer is obvious, right? The cinema workflow is just different. Pulling focus is a very different experience in the world of cinematography, and having lenses designed specifically for it has value. A direct mechanical focus system tends to give you a lot more granular control. Pulling the focus motor out of the lens and making it a separate system with its own functionality, in the world of cinema, that tends to lead to better results than with most focus-by-wire internal lens motors. But that leads me to the second reason that I think this is worthy and why I wanted something like the Simera-C so badly. Separating the electronics from the optics means you can take those optics with you as the electronic components evolve and improve over time. The DJI Focus Pro is a great step in the right direction, but I expect that system to be vastly different in 5 to 10 years. Good lenses, on the other hand, they can last forever. No matter what happens with cameras, no matter how or what Nikon's acquisition of Red means for its next line of cinema bodies, I can keep these lenses and all the benefits of what they do for me. I plan to keep these, as well as their bigger cousins, the Arls over here, for the rest of my cinematic career. Drawbacks. In terms of drawbacks, there's not a ton to talk about here, but there are a few things. Number one, the big one for most people is that they do breathe quite a bit. This is just inevitable for such a tiny lens. The lightest thing you can find that doesn't breathe is probably the Nisi Athenas, which give up almost a stop of light in comparison and are close to double the weight, and definitely on the more clinical side. Personally, I rarely care about lens breathing, and I think people get way too worked up about it. For the very rare shots where it does bother you, you can usually just correct it in post. Number two, the Simera's vignette a little bit more than really modern, clean lenses do. If you shoot on Super 35, this won't bug you much. On full frame, you do see it, but again, it's pretty easy to address in post if you want to. Third, they aren't consistent in length, diameter, or filter thread. I wish Thypoch had just figured out a way to make them all the same, but they didn't. So to use things like the DJI LiDAR or a matte box or screw-on filters, you have to do something to make them all consistent. I would love somebody to make a set of adapters that just brings them all up to the same length and barrel diameter and filter thread. Maybe somebody will do it, like the folks did for the Cooke SP3s. If you use these with a camera that has internal NDs, like an FX6 or a C400 or something like that, that'll alleviate some of these concerns. But for folks like me going back and forth between a Raptor and a smaller mirrorless camera, it's an issue. And as long as we're nitpicking, the close focus on these lenses isn't quite as close as I'd really like it to be, but it's not terrible. You know, this 35 millimeter closes to 16 inches, which is fine, just not fantastic. And ultimately, for all the good I get from these lenses, the drawbacks are just so easily worth it. They're just so darn good and really, really fun to use. Conclusions. The Thypoch Simera-C cinema lens set is something I've been waiting for a long time. And if you stuck around this far, thanks, and you hopefully already know why. There have been a lot of new prime lenses released over the past few years, but this is the first set that really hit the particular bullseye that I was looking for. They have all the functionality that I want in a package that can literally go anywhere. They let me tackle more shots in more situations than anything else, and more than that, they really do have a kind of a magic all their own. I would love to see a 100 millimeter entry, and I would really love to see an ultra wide, anything from 12 to 16 millimeters or so, but even if those focal lengths never come to market, these lenses are still some of the most important cinema lenses made because of what they mean for the growing filmmaking community. As technology gets smaller, better, less expensive, more accessible, it means that more people are getting into filmmaking than ever before. People have differing opinions on that, but I'm personally all for it. In my opinion, this is the best set of compact, professional quality cinema lenses on the market, and almost certainly my first choice recommendation for a filmmaker looking for their first set of cine primes. They tick all those boxes I mentioned at the top of this video, and they do so with an image that is just stunningly beautiful. For some tiny theoretical slice of situations that require particularly clinical levels of resolution and aberration control, these might not be your first choice. But for 99% of any narrative work, including everything I do personally, I would recommend these in a heartbeat. I'm not getting rid of my Aural primes anytime soon. I love them. But if you told me I had to pick one set, I'd have a hard time parting with the Simera-Cs. They're tiny, they work beautifully, and their build quality means they're essentially timeless. I cannot recommend them strongly enough. If you're on a budget and you want to invest in cinema lenses, there are really 3 sets to look at, in my opinion. The DZO Film Aural primes are big, but essentially the perfect lenses. The Nisi Athena lenses offer a really nice image at half the size and weight of these, but they're one stop slower. And then we have these. Yes, they breathe, and you have to figure out the adapter and the ND situation, but what you get in trade is a tiny size that allows you to be so much more nimble and tell any kind of story you want. If you're debating between Vespids or Athenas or Dulens or Aural primes, if it were me, I would probably start with Simera-C in M mount. And if you don't have a lot of cash, let's say you have a full-frame mirrorless camera, you think you want to pick up just one lens for narrative type work, you can't go wrong with the 35mm. This single focal length will cover so many situations and really help you learn the craft of using a cinema lens. As you grow and want to branch out, then add the 75 and 21mm focal lengths, the longer one for close-ups, portrait-style shots, feeling of distance, the 21 covering the other end of the spectrum for either just wider looks or distorted close-ups. Just those 3 lenses, a 21, 35, and 75mm focal length, can do pretty much anything you ever need. And in the Simera-Cs, all 3 of those are T1.5 and under 500 grams. I really do mean it when I say they're some of the most important lenses out right now because of what they mean for accessibility and the possibilities they open up for storytellers everywhere. I bought these with my own money because they're the first set to do what they do in such a small size, and I can say I'm 100% satisfied with the purchase. Let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to use the links in the description for the lenses or the adapters. I've put a link to my workflow on vignette correction if you're interested. That's going to be all for today. Thank you so much to Thypoch and DZO Film and all the other brands out there working to make great equipment accessible to filmmakers everywhere. It is really a great time to be part of this art form. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.